hard, yeah. Let's try it with this.
Okay, let's go.
I have a few names. I have a few names.
Platter? Something?
I don't know if it's open, huh? Sunday Shmoyz Tovshin Pei. Baruch Haba Mishem Mishem. Ich should tell like to welcome to Oilam to the Shia of Rabbi Rabbi Yakov Zef Smichlite on the very important topic of solid foods and Hilchos Shabbos. Today she has learned the Schusser for Shaleme Miriam Bas Hendel for Shaleme B'Tzech Shachar Yisrael. Also Nidvas Benar Rebitz external. She is Nidvas Leil Nishmas Oviv Rabbi Chiel Tzvi Ben Moshe Arya Levi the outside is Chof Tevis. Rabbi Smichlite.
I told someone recently that Hilchos Shabbos is learning Hilchos Shabbos is mitztamek v'yafalai. The more you learn, the more geschmack it is. It's a kochzich, and there's so much that's really in it. Today I have a new sugya that we never learned, Bez Hashem, and I'll tell you where we started. Someone's wife made, I think it was chicken or kugel or roast, whatever it may be, a solid food, and she forgot to spice it. And she didn't want to serve it and tell the guests to spice it. They add salt and pepper. So the question is it mutter to add uncooked spices to solid food, which includes chicken, kugel, cholent, it could be, roast, etc., etc. Or as another question someone asked, he likes to put challah into hot cholent. Is there a problem with that? Or put hot challah on top of a cold schnitzel. So here we come to the very geschmacka sugya that's called davagosha. Let me explain. We once spoke about a very similar shayla. Someone made soup and they forgot to season it. A similar shayla. Can you add uncooked pepper or anything else into a hot pot of soup? So this is basically a Mishnah in Masechta Shabbos Daf Mem Beis. And the Mishnah says that a kli rishon, and today we're going to have, this is going to be the pot of today. I couldn't bring a big pot, but this is a pot. A pot that's on the fire is called the kli rishon. The kli rishon is always capable of cooking. So loimi boy, you can add salt or pepper when it's on the fire. But even if you took the pot off the fire and now it's on the countertop, so it's not on the fire, but says the Mishnah in Shabbos Daf Mem Beis that a kli rishon is capable of cooking even if it's off the fire. So to add uncooked pepper to a pot of soup is a malacha d'oraisa. Why? There's no fire. So it's important to understand this. This pot cooks the soup. How? The fire doesn't touch the soup. The fire goes into the walls of the pot and the heat cooks the soup. So a kli rishon that's on the fire is very, very hot. And never touch a kli rishon because even if it's off the fire, it's very, very hot. So the assumption is that this pot, even if it's off the fire and you put it on the countertop, is still capable of cooking. And that's the Mishnah in Shabbos Mem Beis, a kli rishon, as Rashi explains, kli rishon kol zman she'areiseach mevashel. And the Mechaber Paskins in Shin Yud Ches Tes just like this. Now, of course, if the kli rishon cooled off, so then it doesn't cook. Someone asked me, he has a kli rishon, but it's not hot. Can he add spices? He thought it's exeris hakos if kli rishon is awesome. Mr. Mura says, no, it's not true. So when we're talking about a kli rishon that's hot, kli rishon is fully capable of cooking. So what's the eitzah if you want to add spices to the soup that's unspiced? So the Mishnah continues with a very simple eitzah. Take the hot pot of soup, pour it into a serving bowl or a regular bowl, and now add the spices gesundheit. What's the svara? Now the soup is in a kli sheni, and zok the Mishnah, kli sheni is incapable of cooking. Now the question is, as Tosfos asks in Masechta Shabbos Daf Mem Amud Beis, how do you understand this? If in the kli rishon it's very, very hot, and you pour it straight into the kli sheni, it might be a little less hot, but it's still a piping yat soledis by. How do you understand kli sheni is not capable of cooking? So the answer is really very simple, and this is going to be the site for today. as I told you, a kli rishon, the pot, the walls are very, very hot, besides the soup. So the walls keep the soup hot, and of course is able to cook the soup. The kli sheni, the serving bowl, does not have hot walls. It wasn't on the fire. Worse yet, more so, the walls of the kli sheni are cold. You took it out of the cabinet, so you're missing the heat of the kli rishon, of the walls of the kli rishon. You put the soup into a kli sheni that's cold, and more so, the fact is that soup or any liquid constantly mixes. So first, the outer part of the soup cools off by the walls. Then the soup mixes, and before you know it, the entire soup was affected by a kli sheni. And therefore, the entire soup, the temperature is dropping. And if the temperature is dropping, hot soup in a kli sheni is incapable of cooking. But if you look in Taisus, you'll see mamash this yisoid. Zok Taisus, only kli rishon that oimed ala or daif noisa of chamin, the walls of a kli rishon are hot, and that keeps the soup hot. When it goes into kli sheni, the walls are cold, and then the soup mixes around. So this soup in a kli sheni is incapable of cooking. So therefore, we have the following yisoid. Hot liquid in a kli sheni, you could add uncooked spices, you could add water. Someone told me his children like dropping ice cubes into hot soup in their soup bowl. Why? It's sticky. Okay, fine. Is that mutter? There's it is mutter. Why not? Because kli sheni can't cook water. Can't cook anything. Maybe a kali bishul could cook, of course, but not water or spices. Oh. Now Rabbi say, why don't we say the same is true with our shayla? Let's talk about our sugi of today. You have a plate, and you have, well, I brought an egg. We'll soon use the egg as an example. The egg is this is the dava gush. So this is the chicken, or the kugel, or the egg, the cholent egg. So now that the solid food, we'll call it dava gush, is on a kli sheni, on the plate, so why don't we say the same thing? I could add spices, I could add water if I want. Whatever's not kali bishul does not get cooked in a kli sheni. And the truth is, as we'll see, the pashtus of the Gemara and the Rishonim is that it's takamutta. If you have a solid food, kugel, cholent, meat, chicken on a kli sheni, you could add water, you could add spices. Kli sheni is incapable of cooking. However, here we come to a tremendous yisoid, the Yamshel Shloime in Chulin, Perek Zayin, Simon Memdal, and he says Bekitzich in Ches Ayin Aleph. But his yisoid is that there's a difference between liquids and solid. We'll call a salad a dava gush, a solid food. And Rabbi say we can understand exactly where the Yamshel Shloime is coming from. Because as I explained, if you have soup in a hot pot, and then you pour it into a kli sheni, so there's a lot of action going on. The walls cool off the soup, and then the soup mixes. So before you know it, hot liquid in a kli sheni is cool. But says the Yamshel Shloime, a solid food insulates and maintains the heat inside of it. More so, when you put it in a kli sheni, what changed? Let's say you took a great example where you could see the reality of dava gush. You take what's called the cholent egg. Take the hot cholent egg out of a cholent. First of all, it's come out impossible to hold it. But to peel it, it's just very, very hot. Now take that cholent egg that's steaming hot and put it onto a plate. What changed? There's no walls around it that cools it off. It touches the cold plate. Okay, so the bottom layer of the dava gush gets a little cool, but a solid food doesn't mix. So says the Yamshel Shloime, a dava gush, a hot solid food, again chicken, kugel, eggs, even in a kli sheni, is still very hot. Why? Unlike when you have liquid in a bowl, the walls cool it off. There is no walls in a dava gush. And even if the bottom layer gets a little cooler because of the cold plate, but the rest of the egg maintains the heat. And says the Yamshel Shloima, this is the concept of a davar gush that is capable of cooking even in a klisheni. And therefore, to add uncooked spices to a cholent egg or to chicken on a klisheni, the Yamshel Shloima considers being bishul deraisa. And if you look in the Yamshel Shloima, he says davar gush like oiriz v'doichen. Doesn't have to be a big piece of meat. Barley, beans, is also davar gush. So Rabbi say this is the yesod of the Yamshel Shloima, that a davar gush is capable of cooking in a klisheni, and it's pashut a metzias that it maintains the heat. But the emes we find a little of an earlier source to this chiddush. Imagine the following shaylam. Someone has a slice of very hot meat on his plate in a klisheni, okay? On a plate. He took it right from the roaster onto a plate. And then he cuts it with a halachic knife. So he cut a very hot piece of meat with a halachic knife. What's the halacha with the meat? There's no shishim. So Zok the Issa Veheta, the Issa Veheta was a Talmud of Trumas Hadeshin, from the earliest Achrayim, before the Marshal. So the Issa Veheta in Lamed Vav Zayin says that this meat becomes basar b'chalav, and he spells it out, and the meat is asa b'hano like basar b'chalav. Now the obvious question is, why is it basar b'chalav? If the meat's in a klisheni, and klisheni isn't capable of cooking, so the meat shouldn't be affected. Okay, the knife needs a Yeshua, but why is the meat a problem? Zogti Issa Veheta v'lo idami l'klisheni the bedavi yavesh leka defanes hamakarais and umavashel kozman shayatzu let this boy. And then after he adds, and if there's no shishim, even the meat is asaba, not like basar b'chalav. So this concept of a davar gush, the Marshal says it, but it's actually a little early in the Issa Veheta. The Tazan Yeridei Tzadik Daled Yudaled points out that the Issa Veheta is like the Marshal, and the Torah Sa'asham, we'll soon see in Klal Chav Gimel, says that besides the Yamshel Shloima, you have the Issa Veheta, who's a Kadmain V'dayik Tuva, that holds like the Marshal. The Magen Avram, in the end of Shin Yud Ches, finds a Rashi that holds davar gush is a problem like the Marshal. Now, if you ask me again, why taka is a davar gush asa ayitz in a klisheni? So the answer I will tell you is that a davar gush, if it's hot from the kli rishon and you put it into a klisheni, nothing really changed. I would call a davar gush a moving kli rishon. And again, this Shabbos, if you have cholent eggs, take it out of the cholent, put it onto the plate, and observe it. Nothing really changed. Again, a little bit of the wall of the plate cooled a little bit of the egg, but nothing else. Take an egg, a cholent egg, peel it, and cut it in half. You'll see how hot it is. It's in a klisheni, but that's the metzias that a davar gush maintains the heat. You'll see it b'chush also. If you have a soup that's not so hot, so the soup is not so hot, then you bite into the kneidlach or the piece of carrot, it's much hotter. Well, what happened? Teretz is the davar gush remains hotter than a davar lach. So this is the concept that the Yamshel Shloima, the Issa Veheta say about this davar gush. The Aruch HaShulchan in Tzadik Dal Lamed Bey says that this is something that the chush is made, that a davar gush maintains the heat. Oy bazoi, if you have a piece of meat, chicken, kugel on a plate, adding uncooked spices, according to the Mashal, is bishul, because it cooks even in a klisheni. The point is that there's no difference, kli rishon or klisheni, regarding a davar gush. But I must tell you that this shita is not accepted by all paiskim. First of all, the Chsam Sofer and Yeridei Tzadikei points out, Ein shayrish l'davar b'shasu paiskim. It's interesting. Davar gush, we know from the Marshal, there's no Gemara about it, there's no Rishonim about it. But more so, the Darkei Moshe, which is the Ramah Seif on Yeridei Kuf Hei Dalid, he directly argues on the Yamshel Shloima. And he says that klisheni is incapable of cooking. And he says, the Marshal holds that klisheni is asa, the ein dvar of nirin. And the Moshe says the following, but this is important. Ena chanami, if you take a hot egg, a hot piece of food, and drop it onto a cold food, that could cook the cold food because the hot egg is not yet in a klisheni. The hot egg is coming from a kli rishon, and it hits the cold food. That's iroi mi kli rishon. That's mavashal kedei klipa. That yes. But once you put the hot food into a klisheni, zakti darkei Moshe, klisheni cannot cook. And more so, the Ramah in one of his svarim, Teiras Chat, is the end of Klal Samach Aleph, very innocently says, if you cut a piece of hot meat with a halachic knife ben yoimai, the meat is okay. Why? Because the hot meat's in a klisheni, and klisheni cannot cook. And the Ramah makes a point in Yeredeya, twice, Sadik Dalet Zayin and Kuf Hey Gimel, to paskin like this, halacha, you cut a hot piece of meat in a klisheni with a halachic ben yoimai, the meat is unaffected. So we see this concept of davagush. You have a marshal and a seheta that machmir, and the grosser Ramah is mekel. But what's a little more convincing, there seems to be a beferish Gemara like the Ramah, because the Gemara in Chulent of Kuvdalar Amid Beis is talking about basa b'chalav. As we know, basa b'chalav is asa b'hana, and the Gemara says we have a hot piece of a plate, and you have hot cheese and hot meat, and they touch. Hoy, that's basa b'chalav deraisa. Frag the Gemara, why is the basa b'chalav deraisa? The cheese and the meat are on a klisheni. Soif klisheni. And Rashi explains, klisheni ain't a mavashal. So fregdim in Chas Yakov, the end of Klal Samach Aleph, we see from a Ferish Gemara that klisheni is incapable of cooking like the Ramah. Now, you'll ask me, what's Takav Shad in this Ramah? We explained it so nicely that a klisheni keeps the heat. So I'll tell you one of two things. True, the klisheni goes onto a plate. So first of all, the bottom part of the davagush touches the whole plate. Also, you have to be honest, the whole davagush is exposed to cool air. So the fact the bottom is cool and the air is surrounding the davagush, and it's not and we could add, it's not in the kli rishon that's still very hot because the walls are still very hot. That's why the Ramah holds that all this adds up, and as he says it, hachush meyed, that even a davagush cools off in a klisheni. Lamaisa, some place can go with the Ramah, but I must tell you the Magen Avram in Sifkat and Memhei, the Chayodim and Nishmas Adam Chav Gimel, and the Mishtabura in 4 places, literally. Shin Yud Ches Memhei, Samachei Kuf Yud Ches, and in Hilchos Pesach, Tov Mem Zayin, Chav Dalid, Paskins like the Marshal. So we have a Ramah saying Davagush is okay, and you have a Marshal, and that's where the Magen Avram and Mishtabura Paskin, Davagush is like a moving Kli Rishon. I should mention, Svardim are not Chayish of Davagush, because it's the Magen Avram, it's the Marshal, all Ashkenazim. I saw the Or Latzin in Perek Lamed, Sif Tezayin, the Alkut Yosef, Amid Reish Beis, that Svardim are not Chayish of Davagush. But for us, Ashkenazim, we assume a davagush, even a klisheni, is capable of cooking. Now, but before we apply this lamaisa, I must tell you a beautiful yisoid that's negei lamaisa, but gives a clarity in the whole sugya. We asked a simple kasha. Davagush, I think, is very convincing that it cooks in a klisheni. But the Gemara says in Masech Chulin that a davagush does not cook in a klisheni. So if klisheni. So there's a beautiful yisoid that's really negei lamaisa, and I'll tell you the following. We just learned that a liquid in a klisheni cannot cook. Davagush in a klisheni, we have the marshal, they could cook. What do you do if you have both? Typically, a bowl of hot soup in a klisheni, and you have a kneidlach or a carrot fully submerged in the hot soup. So the hot soup is no longer hot. I mean, it's klisheni. Everybody agrees you're allowed to put in the ice cubes, right? That's the Mishnah. Kneidlach, dava gush, like the mashal, is bishul deraisa. What do you do if you have a dava gush in a liquid? So Zok the Tairas Osham, that was written by the Taisus Yomtiv, and he wrote a pirish on the Tairas Chatas of the Ramah. In the end of Klal Chav Gimel, he says it's Pashit. Even if the dava gush stays hot, but if it's submerged in cooled liquid, that's it. It loses its Shem dava gush. Zokt the Yad Avram on Yeridea, on our Sugi Tzadik Dalet Zayim, a golden avort. We know to make bishul bas v'chalav deraisa, it has to be like sevashel gedi b'chalevim. You have to cook basa and chalav together. If someone roasts cheese and meat, it's not bas v'chalav deraisa. Sli is not bas, it's not bishul. Of course, you can't eat it, but it's not bas v'chalav deraisa. So Zok the Yad Avraham, what's the Gemara talking about? If it's a solid cheese and a solid meat, even if it touches and it's hot, it's not bas v'chalav deraisa. Must be the Gemara is talking about that the meat is like a soupy cholent and is in the liquid. But that also doesn't cook. Why? Because the liquid part is a klisheni. So mamanashach, there's no bishul bas v'chalav deraisa. And that's the Gemara's kasha, soif klisheni. Beautiful. So we see a concept that a soupy cholent or a soup with kneidlach, loimi boy, the soup is not mavashal, even the kneidlach is not mavashal. Comes again the Chsam Soifa in Sech Techul and Daf Kuf Dalar Amid Beis, and he goes a step further. He says, even if you want to say that somehow the kneidl, the dava gush, remains hot in the soup, but there's still no problem with basa b'chalav. Why? And he dissects it very simply. Because the kneidl will say it's still very hot. Fine. And the hot kneidl, the meat is very hot. And the hot meat touches the cheese. What is that? Baitatzli. There's liquid all over, but the liquid is ineffective. The liquid is cooled off. Zaktich Sam Seifa, that's the pshat in the Gemara. Saif klisheni. The liquid is cooled off. So even though you have hot liquid, forget about that. Now what do you have? Hot meat and hot cheese that touches. But what kind of effect is that? Tzli. Therefore there's no bishul bas v'chalav deraisa. So Rabbi say it comes out that, the typical cheeseburger that the Goyim make, which I assume is a hot gush piece of meat, and they put cheese smack on top of it. We don't eat it, of course, for many reasons, but it's not bas v'chalav deraisa. If there's no medium of heat, of liquid, so that would be like tzli, and therefore there would not be bas v'chalav deraisa. Like the Ramah is pashit that's not bas v'chalav. Why? Because the cheeseburger, the burger part is a klisheni. So someone could have enough of that, sell it. I mean, again, you're not supposed to schayt or masurim, but that's not bas v'chalav deraisa. So let's chazrov and apply it l'maisa. Kli rishon is a pot. A pot is capable of cooking even off the fire because the pot remains hot. When you pour liquid into a kli sheni, into a serving bowl or a plate, light the Mishnah, and no one argues, you could put in anything that's not kali abishal. You could put in water, you could put in spices. Dava gush in a kli sheni, an egg or a piece of meat on a plate, light the Ramah, is also not mavashal, except kali abishal. And we saw that the minig of Ashkenazim is to be chayshish for the Yam Shel Shloima, that a gush could cook. So to apply this lemaisa, I hope should be really very, very gishmak. First of all, our original kasha. Can the housewife spice the kugel, chicken, roast? And the answer is avada if it's still in the original pan, pot. No one holds you liable. Because that's kli rishon, even though it's off the fire. So the housewife pulls out the beckel of kugel and adds pepper, that's also the choladeis, that's kli rishon, that's capable of cooking. If you put the kugel or chicken onto a serving plate or regular plate, And then to add uncooked spices, like the Ramah, V'sayata is mutter, and like the Marshal and the Sveheta is conceivably a malacha deraisa of bishul. Oh, now the question is, so let's think. Is it an eitzah to first put the hot kugel onto a serving plate, and then I'll take my plate, regular plate, and put the hot kugel onto that? Now, what's the difference? Because now the davagush is in a kli shlishi. So we know kli shlishi usually, does something. It's not a kli sheni. But then again, today we'll say zil basa taima. Because if we say that a davagush is a moving kli rishon, is not affected by walls because it's not in walls, so mali it's in a kli sheni, or mali put into a kli shlishi. And the emphasis that the Torah Shlomim that I mentioned on the Torah Chayim, he says, Kol zman sheyatzaledes, even b'kli shlishi, kigoin teller, according to the Marshal, that davagush is capable of cooking. I mentioned earlier the Aruch HaShulchan, who writes beferish, even in a kli shlishi, a davagush is able to cook. Now I did see that the Pri Megadim, the Mishnah Berurah quotes the Pri Megadim in Hilchos Pesach, Efsha, kli shlishi is capable of cooking. But I saw a beautiful shtickle in the Shabbos b'Shabbatai Amud Reish Ayin Ches, and he points out that really the Paiskim didn't have this Torah Shlomim, that wasn't available to all Paiskim. It was reprinted in our time, and if they would have seen that the Torah Shlomim says beferish, kli shlishi is no different than kli sheni, they certainly would have not said the word efshem, and halacha l'maisa, a hot davagush could cook even in a kli shlishi. Now, if you'll tell me that by the time it gets to a kli shlishi, it's no longer capable of cooking because it's not so hot, fine, that's what you could say. But the fact that it's a kli shlishi doesn't really change much. Oh. Now, let me make another question and answer because I think it's important. Let's say a person did not know halacha. So he took a piece of chicken from the frying pan, put it onto a kli sheni, and then he put on uncooked spices. The question is, if he would ask you, can I eat the davagush? Because according to the Marshal, that might be a malacha deraisa bishul. Kli sheni cooks in a kli sheni, a davagush cooks in a kli sheni. So you'll say, but it's b'shoigig. So if you look in Shin Yud Ches in the beginning in Sif Aleph, there are shittas that hold, based on a Gemara, that even b'shoigig you can have a on Shabbos. But the emes is, that's going too far. Because even though the Amshel Shloime and the Yisra Beheta are machmir by davagush, but we can't forget Adonenu, the Ramah, is Mekel in Teres Chatos, in the Arki Moshe, in Shulchan Aruch twice. So if the Ramah says this food is perfectly mutter, who could say that b'di'eved, the food is awesome? And Re'ez Apella, the same Mishnah Berurah that writes 4 times that we're machber like the Marshal, in Sivkot and Kuf Yud Ches, he says, if a person spiced or put on food onto a davagush, b'di'eved the food is mutter. Even though he's machber like the Yam Shlomo, true. But then again, if the Ramah's Mekel, who could say it's Chilul Shabbos or Choladayis? The Chsam Soif, in fact, in Yeridei, at the end of Siman Tzadik Hey, he says, like I told you, there's no really source in Shas or Rishonim like the Marshal, and therefore my Rebbe, the Masna Adla, was Mekel b'davagush la'eis ha'tzoyrach. So it's interesting. We are choishish for a davagush, but b'di'eved, you can't say the food is us. Now let me ask you another question, and I advise you approach with caution. Someone took out a hot piece of chicken with a fork and held it in the air because he wanted to really spice it, and he poured spices all over, top and bottom, lebedik. Uncooked spices onto a hot piece of chicken on a fork. And then someone says, what are you doing? What's the problem? It's not in the Kli Rishon. What's the halacha with that piece of chicken? So the truth is, it's possible to say that piece of chicken taka might be awesome, even with the Evid. Why? It's a machloikis, the Marshal and Ramah. Wait, not yet. This piece of chicken was not yet placed onto a kli sheni. Now, it's not in the frying pan, so what is it? It's in limbo. But it's not in the kli rishon, but it doesn't have the cool of kli sheni yet. You're holding it in your air. The fork is in the air. So it's possible that has the halacha of a kli rishon. It's not a kli sheni. And therefore, putting on spices would be mutter clearly, even according to the Ramah. The Ramah is only makel when it ended up in a kli sheni. I'm sorry, it was asa even according to the Ramah. I want to make sure you're listening. Good. Okay. So even like the Ramah would be asa. Now, to say it's asa b'di'evet, I wouldn't say, because again, we paskin, Mishnah Berurah says, it quotes the Gra, that b'di'evet, you can be makel when something was done b'shaygig. But again, the point is, the only heta of the Ramah is when you have in a kli sheni. When it's in the air, is not yet kli sheni. Now, question, can I add salt to my dava gush, which could be chicken, kugel, cholent, etc.? So the chay, we just learned that. Like the Ramah, in a kli sheni is fine. Like the Yam Shleima is a problem. But here we come to an important idea regarding salt. Salt is not a regular food. Salt is more of a chemical. And therefore, the Gemara has a machloikis in Masechta Shabbos daf mem beis amid beis. What are the properties of salt? There are some amarayim that hold, since salt is not a regular food, it never gets cooked, even in a kli rishon, unless it's mamash on the fire. Because it's like something that's very hard to cook, that you're allowed to put uncooked salt into a kli rishon off the fire. The other shita holds punt fakert. Because it's not a typical food, it cooks quickly even in a kli sheni. How do we paskin? So the Mechaben Shin Yud Ches Sif Tes brings the deis and seems to be noita lahakol, that salt cannot get cooked even in a kli rishon. I mean, uncooked salt does not get cooked even in a kli rishon unless it's gabi or eish. The Ramah is not so happy, and he says, no. Salt that's uncooked could get cooked, and if someone's machmir, should be machmir, like the shita, not to add uncooked salt even in a kli sheni. And he says, if I'm machmir, tava yalav bracha. Which means, if you take hot soup, pour it straight from the pot, which is not common, into a soup bowl, according to Ramah, if you add salt, it's problematic. If you don't add salt, you get a bracha. So the Munkach, the Mukar Chaim, on this Mechaba says that, imagine we would hear the Ramah's around the corner is giving brachas of 15 minutes. So we would all run to get a bracha from the Ramah. So Zok the Munkach, quoting his father, the Darkei Tshuva, so it's kedai, don't put in salt into your hot soup kli sheni. The little bit of salt is not kedai to give up a bracha from Adonenu Haramah. If you don't put salt into a kli sheni, you get a bracha of the Ramah. Now, the truth is, most soups that we have today are kli shlishi, because you put it into a serving bowl, and then into the bowl, or into a ladle, into the whatever the case is, you have a kli shlishi. But salt, we are chayshes, gets cooked even in a kli sheni. But Rabbi say, you should know that that's all what's called rock salt, that was mined, that was never cooked. Today there are certain salts, sea salt, or you want to call it the salt water salt, that comes from sea water, that has salt in it, and they cook the water to evaporate the water, and then you're left with salt. Zok Mishnah Berurah, Afanor Tzivkat Nayin Aleph, sea salt that was cooked, then bishul acha bishul. The Shulchan Aruch, the Ramah is talking about mined salt. But if it's cooked, ain't bishul acha bishul. Now the Mishnah Berurah then adds, Lamaisa, there's a tzad not to put salt directly into a kli rishon off the fire. I ain't bishul acha bishul. So that's the famous yisod that salt is soluble. When you add salt into a hot soup, it becomes a liquid. So maybe we have to treat salt like a davalach, and yes, bishul acha bishul by davalach and it's tanning. So that's a chumrah, fine. But mi'ikad the din, you could add salt, cooked salt, into a kli rishon shalei agabi eish. But sicha to put it into a kli sheni, to add salt into your hot soup, if it's cooked, is fine. So oy bazoi, what would be the halacha regarding our case of adding salt to a dava gush? So let's make a cheshbon. If the salt was never cooked, if it's rock salt, so you have a problem. We're chayish to the sheet is that it gets cooked even a klisheni. Davagush is worse than a klisheni. According to Marshal, it's a kli rishon. But even like the Ramah, a davagush is no better than a klisheni. Right? But to add salt onto a cooked salt onto a hot piece of chicken or cholent, that davagush, they were quite comfortable to be making. Because loimi boy, if you hold like the Ramah, that it's a klisheni, so it's fine. But even if it's a kli rishon, but lamaisa, there are those that hold a klisheni, and the whole salt is really mutter, just a chumrah of a liquid. So Taka I saw in the Sefer Ma'or Shabbos, Amud Reish and Zayin, what he heard from Rabbi Yashiv, I'm sorry, Anka Fisher, that you're allowed to add pre-cooked salt onto a davagush, and you could be saimech that it doesn't get cooked because it was already cooked and in bishul acha bishul and there's davagush. But to add uncooked salt, rock salt, grub salts, which typically is not cooked, that's a problem because even because davagush is at least like a klisheni, which we're machmir. Now Rav Moshe in Chelik Dalet Siman Ayin Dalet Sif Cotton Hay says in melech shaloin is bashel, you're allowed to add it on top of a davagush. And it's a pliya. Because even if you hold that a davagush is a klisheni, like the Ramah, but the same Ramah says that you shouldn't add it, toiv lahachma, not to add it to a klisheni. So all the Heintige Pais can point this out. The Ma'or Shabbos and Amud Reish and Ches suggests maybe there's a printing error, and the Ramosha was speaking about a melech shen is bashel, which is also a little of a chiddush, but that would be mutter. But the emphasis is that it doesn't make sense because all the reprinting, Ramosha was reprinted many times, no one corrected that. And I looked in the original source, Rav Shimon Aidis Sefer, who actually asked Ramosha and received response. There it also says melech shaloin is bashel. So it's not a shtickle of a ha'ara, but let's be clear, to add cooked salt onto a davagush is fine, is okay. To add uncooked salt onto a davagush is problematic and should only be added when taka the food did not really cool off. Cool off taka more than lower than yatzil at this point. To add ketchup onto a hot piece of meat on a plate or hot cholent, so that's klar. To add ketchup into the cholent pot, straight into the pot, even if it's shleil gabi eish, is a no-no. Why? Kli rishon is capable of cooking. You'll ask, wait a minute, but ketchup is certainly cooked. That's the Messias. Ketchup is cooked. Ein bishul acha bishul. The answer is, but ketchup is a real davalach. Unlike salt, which is a chiddush davalach, ketchup is a real davalach. So to add a davalach that cool off entirely into a kli rishon is a question of yesh bishul acha bishul by davalach. But our shaila is not to add into the cholent pot. I'm going to add it onto the piece of meat or cholent meat that's on my klisheni. So what's the problem? The only problem is, like the Marshal, that piece of meat is a moving kli rishon. So therefore, yesh bishul acha bishul b'davalach. So here Rav Moshe in Sif Cotton Hay, same shtickle, has a big chiddush, and he says, let's analyze this. To add ketchup onto a hot davagush, there are two svaras to say it's mutter. First of all, according to Ramah, it's a klisheni, no problem. But we're machal like the Marshal, fine. Second point, Ramah himself holds me ikadadin, yesh, like even by a davalach, ein bishul acha bishul. That's the Ramah in Sif Tezvav. But we're machmir, we're chayish lechatchila, that for a davalach, yesh bishul acha bishul. So now to add cooked ketchup onto a davagush, there are two svaras to be makel. First of all, like the Ramah, it's klisheni. And second of all, even if it's a davagush kli rishon, but ain't bishul acha bishul by davalach. So Moshe says, two chumras, you don't have to be chayshish. Or you want to say, two coolers, you could be makel. Whatever the case is, you have two independent reasons to be makel. Now this sounds wonderful, but again, as the Heintige Pois can point out, the Magen Avram and Sivkot and Samachay, Mr. Brewer and Sivkot and Kufiyat Ches quotes this, talks about a similar scenario where there's two coolers and he's still chayshish l'chachmim. Apparently, if we go with the Marshal, we don't look at it like a suffix. I saw the Shmir HaShabbos quoting of Shlomo Zalman in Perik Aleph, Ha'ora Reish, who asked this kasha, and he says that Lamaisa, you could add ketchup to a hot dava gush, and he says two interesting svaras. First of all, even though ketchup is a dava lach, but it doesn't change if it's hot or cold. So we're going to say it's a lach that doesn't improve if you cook it. It doesn't make a difference, hot or cold. So therefore, ain't bishlach a bishla by ketchup. So egin a chiddush. Then he says a bigger chiddush that maybe ketchup that really comes from tomatoes is considered a dava yavesh. After all, it's pretty liquidy, a solid type of liquid. So therefore, dava yavesh ain't bishlach a bishla. So it seems at the end of the day, there are three independent reasons, but lamaisa, the paiskim hold, you're allowed to add ketchup onto a dava gush in a klisheni. Now, lav dafka ketchup, anything that's cooked, if you have a mustard that's cooked, any condiment that's cooked, you could add it to a dava gush. Adding margarine onto a hot potato, or if it's ever negeya, adding butter onto a hot potato, Rav Moshe in the next tshuva, l'shitase, says the same svar. Even though it's cold now, but it was once cooked, butter and margarine are cooked. So therefore we have the same tray, chumriz loy machmarinam. Shlomo Zalman and Shmir Shabbos and Aleph Kuf Tzadik Ches has a problem with that. He says it was only cooked as a milk, but then when it was made into butter, it was not cooked. Butter's not cooked. Margarine is just something that is solidified and is also concerned maybe it's like changing the texture from solid to liquid. So he's not happy about this kula. Lamaisa, it seems that definitely to add a cooked dava lach onto a gush is mutal l'chol. Question, imagine the following, but you have to approach with caution. Someone has a soup that cooled off, and it's not good enough to serve. So he has an idea. He'll take two hot kneidlach from the fire and put them, I only have one, but two hot kneidlach, and drop it into the cool soup. Okay? And then the soup is a little warmer, so it's royu lachila. Is that mutter? So he's saying, oh, well, that's totally in the Ramah and Yam Shleima. Like the Ramah that's not worried about a dava gush, it should be mutter, right? Wrong. This case, all agree. Why? Because the hot kneidl is coming from a kli rishon and didn't go into a kli sheni yet. It's going straight onto a cooled liquid. What's that called? Not kli sheni. That's an iri kli rishon. And you know something? The same Ramah that's mekel in Darkei Moshe says if you pour a hot gush onto a cooled item, that's bishul. Iri kli rishon Ramah is mekel. When is the Ramah mekel? If you take the two kneidlach, put it into an empty soup bowl, and then you add your cooled soup, that would be an eitzah like the Ramah. But later that, even by the Marshal, that's a problem also. But we have to make sure that when we're mekel, it's only when it's in already a klisheni. Another interesting halacha, and if you look in the Mishnah Berurah Sivkot Ayin Ches, he has mamish a very similar case. Question: someone asked me that he had this very case, and he said, "What's the problem? Let's say that since the soup was once cooked, so it's only a chumrah of ein bishul yesh bishul bishul. So let's be mekel to drop the kneidl in." It's also a mistake. Why? Because enechanami, in this scenario, you have one side to be mekel. Ein bishul bishul b'davalach, right? But you don't have the Ramah, because the kneidl going in is a kli rishon, so you don't have two chumras. No, the case of ketchup is better than this case of kneidl. Okay. Question: someone put a hot piece of dava gush, chicken, kugel, whatever it is, onto a plate that was recently rinsed, and there's some droplets of water on the plate. So he put a hot dava gush onto a klisheni that had droplets of water. So someone pointed it out to him. He goes, "Don't worry, it's a dava gush, and I'm saimach under Amo. I mean, I don't know if you're allowed to say that, but he's saimach under Amo, Davagush is not a problem. Is he right or wrong? He's definitely wrong. Why? Because it's the hot gush, not yet in the klisheni. The hot gush is going straight on to uncooked water. That's conceivably bishul deraisa. If he would put the gush onto a klisheni and then sprinkle water on top of it, echrashti. But this case, he's putting a hot dava gush, iri klarishin, onto uncooked water. That's certainly a question of bishul. So, the only issue we could say is that first, again, in the case when the gush is on the dava, on the klisheni, then there's what to be saimach on. Now, if you had on the plate a gravy that cooled off, so that was once cooked, you can say, okay, I'm saimach that aim bishlach abisha by davalach. But even that not convincing, because you don't have the heter of a davagush. It's still an iri mikli rishon. Someone had a question. He wanted to put cooked lukshen or kneidlach into a soup bowl, okay, and then he poured straight from the soup pot on top of the cold kneidlach or lukshen. And someone says, "What are you doing? That's iri kli rishon." So is he right? No, he's not right. You're right, it's iri kli rishon, so what's wrong? They were talking about lukshen that was cooked, kneidlach that's cooked, and there's no water on it, it's dry. So here we have a typical case of a dava yavesh, and bishul acha bishul. Now, typically, lukshen is rinsed, and there's cold water that was never cooked, and there's still cold water on the lukshen, so you have a problem of bishul. That's taka bishul, iri kli rishon. But if he knows the lukshen is completely dried, ain bishul acha bishul, by the lukshen, it's a dava yavesh. Someone made hot knishes to serve Shabbos and made a hot sauce, but forgot to warm up the sauce. So you have hot knishes and cold sauce. So this is mamish, a perfect example of our sugya. If you take the knishes, okay, put it onto a klisheni, onto a plate, and then add the cold liquid, so you have Rav Moshe's heta of treig chumriz loy machmerinan. Why? Because the sauce is ready in his bashel, and also we have davagush later amaz mutter, so that would be no different than adding ketchup to a hot piece of meat. Of course, if you would put the sauce first and then put the knisha onto that, that's batlanish anyhow, but that would be a problem, but that's something that's not done. I should mention, this rather comes up, and people maybe don't realize it, taking a hot pot, okay, from the fire, and putting it onto a countertop, or onto a trivet, that's moist, is bishul l'chol. Why? Because this is, first of all, kli rishon, going straight onto uncooked water. This has nothing to do with the Ramah. This is a kli rishon, being put directly onto cold water, and Dr. Shmir Shabbos and Aleph Samach Vav, that is real bishul. A perfect example of a davagush, as I told you, is the cholent eggs that are taken out of a hot cholent. The eggs are piping hot, you barely could peel it, and when you do peel it, you cut it in half, it's still very, very hot. The question is, after you braved taking it out and peeling it, what can you add to make it more batamt? So one thing I'll tell you, if it's still very hot, that's a real davagush, and light the marshal. Adding an uncooked mayonnaise, for example, some parts of the mayonnaise are uncooked, is real bishul. To add fried onions would be mutter. Why? Fried onions are a dava yavesh, that ain't bishul acha bishul. But to add anything uncooked, whether it's uncooked pepper or mayonnaise, into this steaming hot eggs, light the ramaz mutter, because it's klisheni, and like the marshal is typically bishul deraisa. Now, what the best dates is to cut the eggs or chop the eggs, let some steam out. Then you could still have warm eggs, but if it's not yatzei lettuce by enough to be able to cook the mayonnaise, it's not hot enough to cook the mayonnaise, then you could add it and there's no problem. Someone asked me, he finds it too hard to peel the steaming hot cholent egg. So he wants to drop it He takes it out, I guess he takes it with his hands quickly, out of the cholent, and drops it into a cup of cold water. So it cools off. So he drops the egg into a cup of cold water. So he was thinking, this is mutalait the Ramah. But that's not true. Because again, this is a dava gush, straight out of the kli rishon, not yet in a kli sheni. It's iri kli rishon, and the assumption is there's not so much water, and the egg will cook the water before the water cools off the egg. What probably is a much better eitzah, take the egg and run the cold water, the faucet. So that is hard for me to believe that if the water is comes out so quickly and so much of it, I think that the cold water overpowers the egg much more quicker than the egg cooking the water. Now, the truth is, if you have a hot cholent egg and you put a little bit of water on the top of it, that's bishul. Because that is easy to understand that the water gets cooked. But to run a stream of cold water, I saw the Shmir Shabbos, says that's in Aleph Samach Zayin, and that's very mistavr. A few cholent shaylis. So first of all, what is the status of cholent? The truth is that depends on your nationality. Those that make a solid cholent, a dry cholent, so that's davagush. Either a small piece of barley and beans, that we saw the marshal. Marshal said even iris v'doichen is considered davagush, so you don't need a big piece, even barley and beans is davagush. So a dry cholent is one big davagush. If you have a soupy cholent, so that we saw before, that come out all the paiskim, and that's where the shach paskins, in Yeredeya, in Kufhei Ches, that the gush in a soupy cholent l'mashal, or a kneidlach in soup, so since the soup is a klisheni, is incapable of cooking, that affects the davagush. So it comes out an interesting thing, that a kneidlach in a hot soup, in a klisheni or carrots, the davagush is no longer davagush, even according to the marshal. So to add spices to a soupy cholent and a klisheni and kolshke and a shlishi is okay. Someone asked me, he has schnitzel from Friday night, he wants to have a Shabbos day, but it's too cold. So he pours cholent directly onto the schnitzel. So to warm up the schnitzel. So believe it or not, that's perfectly mutter. Because the schnitzel is a dava yavesh and a bishul acha bishul. So even though it's iri kli rishon, it's fine. You can't put the schnitzel into a kli rishon, but iri kli rishon and kolshke and kli sheni is no problem. Question, someone asked a very long shayla. He has a hot piece of meat and he puts it onto a slice of challah. I said, what's the problem? Challah is baked. Yeah, but maybe now there's a problem of yesh bishul achar afiyah. It's a really hot, steaming davagush right onto a challah. Maybe yesh bishul achar afiyah. I said, Rebbe Levin, where's your bishul? This davagush is also known as a dava yavesh, right? That's what it's called, a piece of meat. So if there's no leichos, if there's no liquid, there's no bishul. So what are you doing? You're rewarming, or maybe rebaking, but you're not cooking. So even though you're putting the gush straight onto the challah, there's no, and enechanami ain't yesh bishul achar afiyah, you can't put that piece of challah into a hot soup, because that's bishul, because you have liquid. But to put a hot piece of meat onto challah is basically not bishul, because there's no liquid. Next question, can you add challah into a hot cholent? Oh, so that, here already we could understand why there's a concern of yesh bishul achafiyah. Why? Because it's a soupy cholent. But then again, if the soupy cholent is in a klisheni, which it is, so then it can't cook. So then the challah cannot get cooked. The only thing is the Ramah says in Sif Hey that we should be chayshish that yesh bishul achafiyah regarding challah, even a klisheni. So it's kedai when you use a ladle or once it's a kli shlishi, you could add challah into a hot cholent. And that's pashit because of the fact is that the soupy pot cooled off. Once the soupy pot cooled off, even the gush pot cannot cook. So basically a hot cholent and a kli shlishi, a soupy cholent, or a regular cholent, a gush cholent, you're allowed to add challah because the gush and the challah is not bishul. Interesting ha'ara that someone asked me, and in fact, he has an interesting meaning, I should say. When they serve coleslaw on Shabbos, they serve coleslaw on a small plate, a special plate. Why? Because coleslaw is not cooked. The mayonnaise is not cooked, and the coleslaw is certainly not cooked. And if the coleslaw touches anything hot on the plate, which is davagush, lamashal, chicken, kugel, a dry cholent, so the concern is that the davagush, here, this is the plate, and this is the kugel. If the hot kugel davagush touches the coleslaw, you're cooking the coleslaw. Or to give you a Yerushalmi mashal, if you have a hot pickle, and in Shalayim they serve it with, a hot Yerushalmi kugel, and you put a pickle next to it, or on top of it, the pickle was never cooked. We don't, kavish k'mavushal is not considered bishul in Shabbos. So it comes out that the davagush is cooking either the pickle or the coleslaw. Now, like the Ramah, you're okay. But since we're chayshish for the Yam Shel Shleima, we have a problem of a gush cooking the uncooked coleslaw or uncooked pickle. So his eight is to put a separate plate with the coleslaw so it doesn't mix with the hot davagush. Now, this is mamish our sugya. But and I saw Taka, a nice arichis in the Sefer Ma'or HaShabbos, Amad Reish Nun Tes, and on, and he quotes a number of poskim that said this is a good thing to be chayshish for. Because it's simple. Davagush, touching uncooked foods, cooks it. But I don't think the Welt is chayshish to have a separate coleslaw plate, and there's probably a few good reasons. First of all, if you have a soupy cholent, and the soupy pot touches the coleslaw, there's no suffix. Va'oid, very often, even if the davagush is hot, is it really hot enough to cook a piece of coleslaw? I mean, you have to just push it. If you have a thermometer, you could measure it, but it's not enough that the davagush is hot. It has to be able to make the uncooked pickle yatzaledisbay. What are the chances that an uncooked pickle will become yatzaledisbay? And Shlomo Zalman is quoted in Shmir HaShabbos in Perik Aleph or Reish Aleph, who says Bechlal is not worried because you're not mechavin, and it's mekalkel. A cooked pickle doesn't taste too good, and it's only mesasek, and it's only a suffix, and generally it's in a kli shlishi, so don't worry about it. That's what Shlomo Zalman says. So the Shmir HaShabbos puts it on the top. He puts it very well. He says if you have a hot pashtida that could possibly cook a uncooked food, be careful. But on the bottom he says, which the Zalman says, don't worry about it. Now, this is something that, again, those that do it, I can't say it's a vilde chumrah, but basically the velt is makel. Again, unless you have a very, very hot davagush that will be able to cook, again, not just make it hot, but cook the gush, the uncooked coleslaw or pickles, is what to be saimachan. Someone, I guess a frumma asked me, he puts a very hot piece of food in his mouth, and then it's so hot he wants to drink something together with it. So that's a davagush in the mouth, so that's already not a psik reisha. I saw the Chut Hashani, says kamat that in Chav Tes, you've cut Nalef, that's only a suffix, and the davagush is only machlaikis, so you could relax. Let me leave it with ha'ora nifla ma'oid. Now, this is not a nervin issue, this is a prima godim's ha'ora. Listen to this. The prima godim in Reish Nun Gimel, Sif Katan Lamed Beis, has the following ha'ora. It's your dua that you're not supposed to mix. Hagasa is an issa d'Rabbanan. Mixing food on Shabbos, even off the fire. Take a cholent off the fire and mix it up is hagasa. So, frag the prima godim, and the prima godim is very bekitzah, kedarka, but he's saying a lot here. Light the marshal, how could you ever eat a cholent in a klisheni? Why? Because you're making hagasa. I mean, you're going to eat it. That's when a spoon has hagasa. So light the Ramah, that's a klisheni, so it's no problem. It's smooth sailing. But light the Yam Shel Shleima, that a klisheni is capable of cooking. So if you add up klisheni cooking and you're eating with a spoon, so then it comes out you're making agasa in what's possible to make bishul. So if you eat with your hands one piece at a time, it's no agasa. But with the spoon is awesome. As I tie it to prima godim. So zog the prima godim agoyin shavart, mamonashach. If there's some liquid in the cholent, So then that's takan emasik lisheni, and that cooled off the solid pieces. If you only left, if you have a dry chunk mikara, pieces of dry, he says there's no agasa when you have dry and dry. So therefore you could enjoy your cholent. I couldn't talk to you.
That beautiful share. Rabbi say, Ignische Torah starts today, the first day Shovavim all over the world. Hundreds of thousands of Yidden are coming to Shura Torah and Hilchos Talis and Mishpacha, Rabbi say. The biggest Zikur Rabbim, Mechazek Klal Yisrael, 10 languages, thousands of Shiurim, hundreds of thousands of Yidden are coming to Shura Torah and Mechazek Talis and Mishpacha. This is the biggest chizik from Avraham Avinu till today, the Klal Yisrael, Mechazek Talis and Mishpacha. But we need your sponsorship, Rabbi say. Please sponsor a community for Fry Yidden to come learn the first time Talis Mishpacha. Yes, there are a lot of kibbutzim all over Israel that are coming to Shur for the first time. You can have the Zikua Rabbim of all the doidas coming out of this Kedusha and Talis Yisrael. Sponsor a series of Talis Mishpacha for $1,000. You can pay it out. If you could sponsor 10 series, it's a bigger chizik. But Rabbi said, we need your help. We have a credit card with big Zikah Rabbim, Tizkir Mitzvahs. Also like to thank how we did Rabbi Yitzchak Stern for sponsoring today's Shil, Refuah Shalem Imoy. Everybody should say together, Refuah Shalem Miriam Bas Hendel, Refuah Shalem B'tzach Shachar Yisrael. Also, the yacht is this coming week. Rabbi say, please sponsor this Shurim, a big tremendous Zikah Rabbim for Klal Yisrael. Also, there's a luach, Rabbi say, forgot the luach. A daf a day in Taras Mishpacha. You'll get to know ganz your day chelik beis in the days of Shovavim. Reb Chana bar Kashem merot Kodesh Baruch Hu zakos is Yisrael zik hebelem teure mitzvos shenem an rechovas manzitka yagdil teure v'yadim. Amen. 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 Yehei Shemei Rabam. The Sikkim is short there. Rabbi said, if you don't have a share in your shul yet, or you know a community that doesn't have a share, please call Ignische Torah at 718-851-8651. You can give your credit card or email it to tapecenter@yeshivanet.com, or mail your donation to Ignische Torah, 1235 47th Street, Brooklyn, New York, 11209. Yashikoyach Tizkir Mitzvahs.
I saw you on the radio. No. I need this concession stand.
Double lukshen. Yes,
I like the concession. It's like a concession.
Put a cold bottle of milk into hot, into. Oh no, it's good. It's good because the cliche only lasts. I didn't say ladle. Ladle could, and he's right. That's like a fork holding it over good. If you take a ladle, no, that's like cliche. Yeah, I was very careful. This guy's good. Oh, the best. Okay, Soupy, ready? Just the bottom is cold.
Or just the bottom.
From the ear. Okay.
Then you open up, then
Right,
you have the
right,
why
right.
the palatine.
So that's what I have to say. That's what I wanted to say. The Shulchan says the chush is made like the marshal, and the Rama says the chush is made not like the marshal. You guys are both right. It's exposed to the cool, and it gets cool on the outside, but the inside.
So that pickle, they should learn a pickle that's going to touch. It's touching
No.
what? Cold. It's not touching fat. Where is it hot? The inside is hot.
In anything, any touching.
Anything?
That's what I wanted to say also.
You
Yeah.
have to close the
You ready? Come.
But sorry, before the food becomes a davar yavesh, or Smith will say the sikum.
Just the Chazal we learned today, Be'ez Hashem, a kli rishon, as we saw, midin ha-mishnah, is capable of cooking even shalei gabi ha'esh. A pot off the fire has the same capabilities of cooking as long as yad sheledas way, of course, and therefore nothing can be added to a kli rishon even off the eish. Kli sheni cannot cook. That's what the Mishnah says, unless it's a kali abishal. But anything, lamashal, adding uncooked spices, water, oil, is mutter to add to a klisheni, because klisheni is not mavashal. So to add spices to a hot soup in a klisheni, in a serving bowl or a regular bowl, is certainly mutter. Today's sugya was handling adding a davagush, cooking a davagush. The Amshel Shleima, which is really an isavaheta, was machadish, a solid food, maintains and insulates the heat, is like a moving kli rishon, and therefore can cook even a kli sheni. The fact that you moved it to a second or even a third plate doesn't change the intensity of the heat that's contained within. The Ramah and others argue, and we try to explain the machlokes, that the Ramah held that the fact is that the outside is exposed to the cool air, the bottom touches the plate, and therefore it effectively cools off. The Amshel Shleima says that the inside is still extremely hot, and you see b'chush, you cut a egg, davagush, is a lot of heat inside, a kneidlach, a carrot. But at the end of the day, an afkamina would be to adding spices onto a davagush in a klisheni or a klishishi, like the Amshel Shleima is asa, and like the Ramaz mutter. Another nafkamina, you're a day in the nafkamina, if you cut a hot piece of meat with a milchik ben yoima, a knife, like the Amshel Shleima, the Heta says this would be a bishul bas b'chol of the Raisa, and like the Ramah, it would be mutter. If you have a gush in liquids in a klisheni, most paiskim, that's why the shach paskins, that the liquid cools off, and that in turn cools off the kneidlach in the soup because it was fully submerged in a cooled liquid. According to the marshal, that's chaysh v'klisheni, who had done klishlishi, and adding spices to a very hot davagush, even a klishlishi, should not be done. But the eved, it would be mutter, because you rely on the Ramah, but if a person spiced a davagush in a kli rishon, or even in a fork, which is like a kli rishon, which was not yet a klisheni, that would be takat asa, even according to the Ramah. Adding salt to a davagush, salt that was cooked, is fine in a klisheni. Adding uncooked salt to a davagush is problematic. Adding ketchup, which is cooked already, to a davagush, Rav Moshe is mekel, because trei chumras loy machmirinon. Butter and margarine will be the same, and some are machmir in both of those, but they're mekel for a different reason, that ketchup is like a davar yavesh. Hot gush onto cold water on a plate, lamashal, that was just rinsed, has nothing to do with the marshal Ramah. This, even the Ramah is machmir. This is iri kli rishon. The hot gush coming from a kli rishon directly onto the hot cold water before it gets to the klisheni would be awesome. Putting hot kugel onto a wet plate. Liidach gisa, putting hot soup straight from the kli rishon onto dry lukshen or kneidlach is fine. Ein bishlach a bishul b'davar yavesh. Adding cooled sauce to a hot knish in a klisheni is mamish like ketchup, and you can be mekel because that's trei kuloi chumras lei machmirinan. A hot pot onto a countertop, which is moist, is a problem of bishul mamish. That's a kli rishon, cooking the little bits of water. A cholent egg is a davagush. It's best to wait till it cools off somewhat, and then to add mayonnaise or onions. Fried onions you could add because ain't bishlach a bishul, and it's a davayavesh. But adding an uncooked items into a cholent eggs, better wait till it's no longer yatzul edisbite. To put the hot egg straight into a cold cup of water is a problem because that's irui. To rinse it with cold water is okay. A soupy cholent takes on both the soupy pot and the gush become a klisheni and is fine. Hot cholent onto schnitzel is okay because ein bishlach bish by daviyavesh. Hot meat onto challah is not a problem. Challah into hot cholent and a klishlishi is certainly not a problem no matter what it is. Putting an uncooked food, whether it's pickle or coleslaw, next to a hot davagush is okay, l'chayra, unless you, like someone pointed out, if you pour the cholent onto the pickle, or fakir, you put the pickle onto the cholent or the coleslaw onto it, then you have a problem. But basically, if it's close by, try to make sure that it's not a psikresha. And as we said, the Pri Megadim says mixing a davagush and a klisheni is not a problem in manavshach. Okay, shkar for listening. Yes, Rabbi.
All the times we talk about what's a layla, tradition or kishke, what are they talking about? What are they talking about? Obviously, it's a tradition, it's a middle and you're taking out. That's called mayonnaise. Okay.
The other tradition is taking without making is also possible. If you take the top layer with the chef,
that's